Senator Mortimer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to also compliment all of the senators that have debated this issue. I feel very inadequate in being able to maybe express my feelings, but I do think that there are some issues that maybe have not been addressed, and that may seem like perhaps pretty unreasonable to assume that there's something that hasn't been addressed. It was interesting after our debate of Senate Bill 1042 that I happened to be at a gathering, and I happened to be with our state treasurer. And we were talking about the length of the debate and the struggles that we had had in the House, in this body. And he said, "It's interesting." He said, "I was just contacted by Moody's about the estate exchange." And then he didn't really elaborate too much. And I got thinking, why would that be? And it's pretty evident to me, having been in the financial world and so on, that it's because it, in my opinion, is a substantial contingent liability. Now, I know, and we'll get to that in a minute. Let me just talk to you a little bit about contingent liabilities. And I'm going to just quote, Mr. President, or paraphrase from a little work that I did on Investopedia and then, of course, dummies.com. And that seemed like appropriate, but talking about contingent liabilities. Contingent liabilities are possible financial obligations that may be incurred by an institution or organization contingent upon the result of a future event. These potential costs can be recorded on the balance sheet of the organization and are ranked in order of likelihood that such contingencies will come to fruition. And then it says that there are different rankings: probable, reasonably probable, remote. Here's some other things. Examples of contingent liabilities are acts of employees, credit guarantees, incomplete contracts, third-party indemnities, unfilled purchase orders, and a few others. As a businessman, I've had my experience with contingent liabilities. And sometimes I've been able to get past them, and sometimes I haven't. But many of you know that whenever you go get a loan, and particularly if you're doing it through a business entity, there's typically going to be a personal guarantee. And I'm just going to look at the bill for just a minute in regards to contingent liabilities, if I could, Mr. President.
Having identified the source, the Senator may read.
I know that the bill, and I want to basically indicate that I think this bill is a lot better than the bill we had before. There's been a lot of good work here. And there's been an attempt to limit our liability. And part of that is in Section 416102 that basically says that the state will actively resist. There's another section that says that basically in 6104 that it's an independent corporate body of politic. But then again, it says that it's performing an essential public function. It brings the state back into it. And then in 6105, it talks about that the state of Idaho shall not be liable for any obligations. Any of you that have been in business know that you cannot, even in a document, limit certain liabilities, contingent liabilities, because of all of the unknowns. I express to you that this is a significant contingent liability to our state. We are obligating our state, I believe, both financially and morally, to some of the things that we would not like to do. I'd like to just continue on. Besides the contingent liability issue, there's another reason why I oppose this legislation. It's a top-down program. Now, you've heard that argument before, that and I resist that, and there are counter-arguments to that. But let me go to my number 3 reason, and that is that our state is financially fragile. Now, some will disagree with that. But in order to incorporate and bring a significant contingent liability to our state, are we financially strong enough to take care of it? Where have we been? If we look back, we had prosperous years. And then we've gone through the tough years. And right now, maybe we're in a little bit of stability. But it's very, very fragile. We have sequestration. We have an unstable federal government. We have a lot of things. We have limited savings accounts. We're in a very fragile economic environment. If I were thinking about this, I would also like to think about it as the state's entering into a partnership. Now, again, we've tried to state in a small degree how this partnership would occur. But have we done a good job? I would submit that if I took the terms and conditions of this agreement to any of my attorney friends, and particularly those that I want to give me that advice, I would say that they wouldn't advise me to get into it. Number one is the partner that I'm going into partnership with isn't financially sound. All right? The partner that I'm trying to do business with is going to dictate all of the business decisions. Now, he might let me have a little say on where I go to lunch and a few minor things, but when it comes down to the major financial decisions, I won't have any say. I submit that in this partnership, I won't know all the rules. Typically, in a partnership, you try and set down the rules to begin with. And we don't have them, in spite of the 13,000 pages and the 700 additional pages and all of that. The ground rules have not been set out in good, strong financial terms. Do I have a good business plan? Have I sat down my business plan and said, this is what's going to happen in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? No. As a banker, this is not a good business plan. We've got the rudiments. We've even got somebody that's willing to provide the cash. but we don't have a good business plan. We don't know what it's going to cost. We don't know what we're going to charge. We're saying we're going to go into it and we're going to hope it works. The last item that I noted was, do we have the reserves? If I go into a business agreement with someone, I want to know what reserves I have in place so that if something goes wrong, I can handle it. Now, I admit the bill has tried to limit what that is, but it's only as good as the paper, and in reality, as we know, a partnership is only as good as the integrity of the partners in the partnership. And I've learned that the hard way too. And it's cost a lot of money, cost me a lot of money. The other reason I am opposed to this legislation is the right to life issues that has already been addressed. It's been indicated that there's resistance, that we need to show some resistance to the applicable to this law, the bad law, in my opinion. One of the other reasons is I've thought about it as I have thought about all of the other states that have said, no, this isn't the right thing to do. And I've thought, how can we say that we know more than they know? And I'm not qualified to say that. There's 26 that have said we're going to let the federal government come and implement it. Plus, in reality, I believe Utah has done that also. And Mr. President, if you would, I would like to read from Governor Herbert's remarks on February 6th of 2013, an address that he gave on health care reform.
Having identified the source, the senator may read.
Thank you. In the first part of this address, he talks about health care reform and what they have done to try and implement a state exchange. And they've worked hard at it. And Utah, and I'm going to read, senators. Utah will work within federal law to ensure continued success of our exchange. However, there are some red lines that our state will not cross. We will not enforce the individual mandate. Even though the Supreme Court ruled the individual mandate constitutional, it is still bad policy. Each state should have the option to determine for themselves if a mandate makes sense. I do not want to be the one taking the phone calls from those individuals who receive the tax penalty by the IRS for not having insurance. We will not, number two, and I'm labeling these number two, he did not. This is the second point. Quote, we will not administer Medicaid through Utah's health exchange. We want to maintain clear separation between private insurance options in our market-based exchange and the welfare-based public programs such as Medicaid, in order to preserve the market-based principles behind Utah's unique exchange. It is critical that the exchange remain focused on the core mission of creating competition and choice in insurance markets. Those who are in need should have the opportunity to get assistance, but that determination and effort should be done separately. Number three, quote, Utah will not administer the premium tax credit through our exchange. Given the fiscal uncertainty in Washington, D.C., the premium tax credit creates a new level of entitlements for middle-class Americans. For a federal government that is already borrowing 40 cents for every dollar it spends because of entitlement programs, we cannot afford adding new entitlements. We cannot afford. Adding new entitlements is a risky proposition, and we don't know how much this new entitlement will cost. But if history is our teacher regarding skyrocketing costs of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, we're going to learn a hard lesson. For example, the original cost estimate to implement the Affordable Care Act was $900 billion. The latest estimate from CBO is now $2.7 trillion. That's a threefold increase, and implementation hasn't even begun. Mr. President, and just to continue, I'm going to just slip down closely to the end of his address and just do a couple of other things. He says, quote, "The United States Department of Health and Human Services will assume responsibility for the individual exchange, including the web portal for individuals, the Navigator program, and administering tax credits. Further, because Utah is already operating a small business exchange, there is no need for HHS to duplicate our efforts." So he clearly indicates that the federal exchange is going to do those things that Utah does not feel is appropriate. One last point, Mr. President, from his address. Quote, "There are many health care issues that we will need to address in the future. One area that will require attention is Medicaid. Even before the Affordable Care Act, Medicaid was a large and growing portion of Utah State's budget. In the 1990s, Medicaid consumed 9% of the state budget. Today, Medicaid comprises nearly 20% of our state budget. By fiscal year 2020, it is estimated to exceed 30%, and that is without any of the Medicaid expansion envisioned in the Affordable Care Act. We need maximum flexibility to run our program the best way we see fit." Senators, Idaho has approximately those same ratios in the costs of Medicaid and the costs of health care and where it's going. And I know that's a discussion for another day. The last reason that I oppose this legislation is I don't want Idaho to accept the moral and believed responsibility of our citizens to adopt the Affordable Health Care Act or the Not So Affordable Health Care Act. Those contingencies, those future consequences, either financial or moral, and the contingent liabilities are just too great for us, fellow citizens and fellow senators. I ask and I plead that you vote no.